Jack Mason opened his eyes to darkness. His head throbbed with pain. The escape pod's emergency lights blinked red, casting strange shadows across the cramped space. He tried to move and winced. His right arm was badly cut, and dried blood caked his uniform. "Hello, Captain? Dr. Grant. Anyone copy?" Jack spoke into his communicator. Only static answered him. Jack checked the pod's systems. Life support was working, but communications were dead. Through the small viewport, he saw an alien sky. 2 moons hung low on the horizon. One was pale blue, the other a dirty yellow. The landscape outside looked harsh, rocky plains covered with strange purple vegetation that swayed in the wind. "So they left me," Jack whispered to himself. He remembered what happened. The U.S. Horizon had discovered this planet 3 days ago. It wasn't on any star charts. Dr. Olivia Grant, the expedition's chief scientist, had been excited about the unusual readings from the surface. "This planet has signs of complex life forms unlike anything we've seen before," she had told the crew during the briefing. "The atmosphere is breathable, but has higher oxygen levels than Earth. The gravity is about 20% stronger." Captain Sam Lewis had selected a team of 6 for the first ground exploration. Jack, as security officer, went with them. The landing had gone smoothly at first. They set up a small research station and began taking samples of the local plants. Jack remembered how Dr. Grant's eyes had lit up when she examined the purple grass-like plants under her portable microscope. "These aren't just plants," she had said. "They have complex cell structures that share features with both plants and animals from Earth." This planet's evolution took a completely different path. Then the attack happened. It came without warning. Large creatures burst from underground tunnels. They were the size of bears but moved like lizards, with 6 legs and thick armored skin. Their jaws could crush rock. "Fall back to the shuttle," Captain Lewis had yelled. In the chaos, Jack had gotten separated from the others. He was chasing after Kelly, the junior scientist, when one of the creatures knocked him down a ravine. His communicator broke in the fall. He made it to an escape pod, but must have hit his head during launch. Now he was alone on this hostile world. Jack checked the pod's emergency supplies. He had a medical kit, a survival knife, emergency rations for about 2 weeks, a water purifier, and a basic toolkit. Not much to survive on an alien planet. A loud screech from outside made him freeze. Something large moved in the purple vegetation. Through the viewport, Jack caught a glimpse of a creature. It wasn't one of the 6-legged attackers from before. This one moved on 4 powerful legs. It had dark green scales and a long neck. It sniffed the air near the pod, then moved away. Jack knew the pod wouldn't protect him forever. Sooner or later, he would need to go outside. The horizon might come back for him, but he couldn't count on it. The captain's first duty was to the safety of the ship and crew. If they thought he was dead, they might have already left the system. He looked at the strange world outside. The light from the system's sun was starting to fade. Night was coming. Jack didn't want to think about what might hunt in the darkness on this planet. One problem at a time, he told himself as he began to clean and bandage his injured arm. First, survive the night, then worry about tomorrow. As darkness fell, strange calls echoed across the landscape. Some sounded like whale songs, others like the roars of lions. A few made no sense to human ears, clicking and humming sounds that seemed to vibrate through the pod's walls. Jack checked his knife and prepared for a long night. He didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of his new life on a world where humans were not the apex predators. At least, not yet. 7 days had passed since Jack crashed on the alien planet. He had moved his camp away from the escape pod to a small cave in the side of a hill. The cave gave him better protection and a good view of the surrounding area. Jack spent his mornings collecting purple plants that looked like ferns. He had tested them carefully and found some were safe to eat. They tasted bitter but filled his stomach. He saved his emergency rations for days when hunting failed. The stronger gravity made everything harder. His muscles ached constantly. Simple tasks like gathering wood for his fire left him winded. But Jack noticed he was already getting stronger. His body was adapting. Note to self: higher oxygen levels seemed to speed up recovery, Jack said into his personal recorder. He kept a daily log, partly for scientific reasons and partly to keep himself sane. He had seen many strange creatures over the past week. Most stayed away from him. Some looked like Earth animals but with extra limbs or unusual features. Jack gave them names to help him remember which ones were dangerous. The hoppers were rabbit-sized creatures with 6 legs that bounced through the purple vegetation. They were good to eat. The buzzers were flying insects as big as his hand. They had stingers that could pierce his uniform, so he avoided them. Today, Jack was tracking a new animal. It looked like a cross between a deer and a lizard. It had a slim body with scales instead of fur. It would provide enough meat for several days if he could catch it. Jack moved carefully through the purple ferns, his makeshift spear ready. He had made the weapon from a long, straight branch and the knife from his survival kit. The alien deer lizard was drinking from a small stream up ahead. Just as Jack prepared to throw his spear, a loud roar shattered the quiet. The deer lizard bolted away. From the dense vegetation on the other side of the stream, a large predator emerged. It was one of the 6-legged hunters that had attacked his team. Jack had named them Ravagers. The creature saw Jack and snarled. Its armored skin was dark gray with blue patterns. 6 yellow eyes tracked his movements. Jack raised his spear, heart pounding. The Ravager was twice his size. "I'm not on the menu today," Jack said firmly, though he knew the creature couldn't understand him. The Ravager charged across the stream. Jack held his ground until the last second, then dodged to the side. The creature was fast, but couldn't turn quickly. As it passed, Jack drove his spear into a gap in its armor near its back leg. The Ravager roared in pain and spun around. Snapping the spear, Jack pulled out his knife. He remembered his military training. Use the environment. Use your opponent's strength against them. When the Ravager charged again, Jack backed up against a large boulder. At the last second, he dove to the side. The predator crashed into the rock, stunning itself. Jack didn't waste the opportunity. He jumped on its back and drove his knife between the armored plates at the base of its neck. The Ravager thrashed and roared, then collapsed. Jack rolled away, breathing hard. His hands shook. He had survived, but just barely. As Jack caught his breath, he noticed movement in the trees around him. Several pairs of eyes watched from the shadows, smaller creatures. They were looking at the dead Ravager, then at Jack. One creature stepped forward slightly. It looked like a wolf but had scaled skin and a longer snout. It stared at Jack with what seemed like curiosity rather than hunger. Jack stayed still, knife ready, but the wolf-like creature just watched him. After a long moment, it made a soft, rumbling sound. The other creatures responded with similar noises. Then, as quietly as they had appeared, they melted back into the forest. Jack was left alone with his kill, but he had a strange feeling that something important had just happened. Something had changed on this alien world. He was no longer just prey. He had become something else. 3 months had passed since Jack crashed on the alien world. His body had changed. His muscles were denser now from the high gravity. His skin had tanned dark from the planet's sun. Scars covered his arms and chest, each telling a story of survival. Jack sat at the entrance of his cave home, which he had expanded and made comfortable. He was carving marks into a piece of bone. The bone came from a Ravager he had killed last week. He used it to keep track of time. Day 92, Jack said as he made the mark. Still no sign of the horizon. He had stopped expecting rescue weeks ago. Now his focus was on understanding this world. Jack had learned that the planet's creatures communicated in ways he never imagined. They used smells, low sounds humans could barely hear, and body movements to talk to each other. The wolf-like creatures, which Jack called prowlers, had become a regular presence. They kept their distance but followed him when he hunted. At first, Jack thought they were waiting for him to leave scraps. Now he wasn't so sure. "They're studying me," he told his recorder. "Just like I'm studying them." Jack had started to experiment with mimicking the creature's signals. He collected glands from kills and used the scent markers. He practiced making the low rumbling sounds the prowlers used. It felt strange, but sometimes the creatures seemed to respond. This morning, Jack planned to check his traps and then follow a prowler pack. He had noticed they were more active than usual. Something had changed in their territory. As Jack moved through the forest, he heard a high-pitched cry. It wasn't a sound he recognized. He followed it to a clearing and found a young prowler trapped under a fallen tree branch. Its leg was pinned, and it called out in distress. The rest of the pack was nowhere in sight. Jack approached carefully. The young prowler saw him and tried to pull away, making frightened noises. "Easy there," Jack said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." He knew the creature couldn't understand his words, but his gentle tone seemed to calm it. Jack examined the situation. The branch was heavy, but he could lift it enough for the young prowler to escape. As Jack prepared to move the branch, a deep growl came from behind him. A massive creature stepped into the clearing. It wasn't a Ravager. This predator was much larger, with sharp teeth and claws that could easily tear Jack apart. Its skin was a pattern of red and black scales. Jack had seen these creatures from a distance, but never this close. They were the true apex predators of this region. In his notes, he called them slashers because of their distinctive claws. The slasher looked at Jack, then at the trapped young prowler. It was clearly seeing an easy meal. Jack stood his ground between the slasher and the young prowler. He held his spear ready and made a low warning sound he had heard adult prowlers use. The slasher seemed confused by Jack's behavior. It circled around, looking for an opening. Jack matched its movements, heaping himself between the predator and the trapped young one. The standoff lasted several minutes. Finally, Jack lunged forward with his spear, making jabbing motions and shouting. The slasher backed up, not used to prey that fought back. After a few more threatening advances from Jack, the predator turned and disappeared into the forest. Jack quickly turned and lifted the branch. The young prowler pulled its leg free and limped a few steps away. It looked at Jack with golden eyes that seemed too intelligent for an animal. To Jack's surprise, the young prowler didn't run. Instead, it made a soft chirping noise and waited. In the distance, Jack heard answering calls. The prowler pack was coming. He expected them to be aggressive, to protect their young. He gripped his spear tighter and prepared for a fight. But when the pack arrived, they didn't attack. 6 adult prowlers emerged from the trees. The leader, a large male with a scar across his snout, approached Jack slowly. The young one limped to the pack, making excited noises. The lead prowler stopped 10 feet from Jack. It lowered its head slightly and made a rumbling sound in its chest. Then, to Jack's amazement, it backed away, still facing him. The pack followed, disappearing into the forest with the young one. Jack stood alone in the clearing, trying to understand what had happened. Something had changed today. A connection had been made. That night, Jack found a dead hopper outside his cave. It was a fresh kill, a gift from the prowlers. 6 months had passed on the alien planet. Jack now moved through the forest with the prowler pack. They accepted him as one of their own. The young prowler he had saved, whom Jack named Spot for the white patch on his back, often stayed close to him during hunts. Jack had learned much about the planet's social structure. Different species had their own territories, but they all followed rules. These rules weren't like human laws. They were based on strength, skill, and something Jack could only describe as respect. "It's not just about being the biggest or strongest," Jack told his recorder. "It's about proving yourself worthy of territory." The prowlers had a complex system of signals. Jack could now understand and use many of them. They used scent markers to claim areas, body postures to show rank, and various sounds to communicate across distances. Jack's human voice couldn't make all their sounds, but he had learned to mimic enough to get by. Today, the pack was on edge. They kept looking to the north and making nervous sounds. Jack had learned to trust their instincts. "What's wrong, big guy?" Jack asked the pack leader, whom he called Scar. Scar made a low rumble and started north. The pack followed, with Jack keeping pace. They traveled farther than their usual hunting grounds. As they crossed a ridge, Jack saw what had the pack worried. In the valley below stood a massive creature unlike any Jack had seen before. It was huge, at least 4 times the size of a ravager. Its body was covered in thick armor plates. 6 powerful legs supported its weight. Its head had multiple eyes and a mouth full of teeth that could crush stone. "So that's a titan," Jack whispered. He had heard stories from human explorers of massive apex predators on other worlds, but nothing prepared him for seeing one in person. The titan was tearing apart a slasher, eating it like it was nothing more than a snack. The prowlers stayed hidden, watching. Jack noticed other animals in hiding as well. Small prey animals, other predators, all watching the titan with fear. The titan finished its meal and raised its head. It made a sound that shook the ground. The message was clear to Jack, even without understanding the specific signals. This territory now belonged to the titan. Over the next week, Jack watched as the titan claimed more land. It killed anything that challenged it. 3 slashers died trying to defend their hunting grounds. A group of ravagers fled rather than fight. The prowler pack was forced to hunt in smaller areas. Food became scarce. Spot and 2 other young prowlers grew thin. Jack knew they couldn't continue like this. One night, as the pack rested in a cave, Jack studied the titan from a distance. He noticed patterns in its behavior. It patrolled its territory at specific times. It had a favored spot near a large rock where it slept during the hottest part of the day. Most importantly, Jack noticed a small gap in its armor near its throat. A potential weakness. "You can't just kill it," Jack told himself. "That's not how this world works." Jack had learned that territory was claimed through ritual challenges. The titan had claimed this land by announcing its presence and defeating challengers. To reclaim the territory, someone would need to challenge and defeat the titan by the same rules. No single predator on this part of the planet was strong enough to challenge the titan. But Jack wasn't just any predator. He was human. He had something the other creatures didn't have: the ability to plan, to use tools, and to think ahead. Jack spent days preparing. He crafted new weapons. He studied the titan's movements. He learned its strengths and weaknesses. On the 7th day, Jack stood at the edge of the titan's territory. He wore armor made from ravager plates. He carried a spear with a tip hardened in fire. Around his neck hung teeth and claws from his kills, symbols of his status that any creature would understand. The prowlers gathered behind him. They seemed to understand what he planned to do. Scar approached and touched his snout to Jack's hand, a gesture of support Jack had never seen before. Jack raised his spear and made the challenge call he had practiced. The sound echoed across the valley. In the distance, the titan lifted its massive head. It heard the challenge. It turned toward Jack and roared in response. The challenge had been accepted. By sunrise tomorrow, either Jack or the titan would rule this territory. The sun rose over the valley, painting the alien landscape in shades of orange and purple. Jack stood in the natural arena where the titan had accepted challenges before. His heart pounded in his chest. Sweat ran down his face despite the morning chill. All around the arena, creatures gathered to watch. Prowlers sat on nearby rocks. Ravagers lurked at the edges. Even small prey animals watched from safe hiding spots. Word of the challenge had spread through the forest in ways Jack still didn't fully understand. "Never thought I'd have an audience for this," Jack muttered to himself. His weapons were simple but effective. A long spear with a sharp stone tip, a knife made from ravager teeth, a sling for throwing stones, Jack had also prepared special bundles of plants that produced strong odors when crushed. The smells confused the local predators, making it harder for them to track by scent. The ground shook. The Titan approached. It was even more massive up close. Its armored hide gleamed in the morning light. 6 yellow eyes fixed on Jack. The Titan made a sound that was part roar, part hiss. The message was clear. This human was about to die. Jack stood his ground. He made the formal challenge sound he had practiced with the prowlers. The Titan seemed surprised that this small creature knew the proper challenge ritual. The Titan charged. Jack dove to the side at the last second. The massive creature crashed past him. Jack jabbed with his spear, but it bounced off the Titan's armor. The Titan spun with surprising speed and swung a clawed limb. Jack barely ducked in time. "Too slow, big guy," Jack said, though he knew talking was pointless. The fight continued. Jack stayed mobile, using his smaller size and greater agility to avoid the Titan's attacks, but he couldn't find a way through its armor. Every strike with his spear simply scraped across the hard plates. The Titan grew more aggressive. It smashed rocks and tore up trees in its efforts to catch Jack. 20 minutes into the fight, Jack was tiring. The higher gravity made every movement harder. His muscles burned. The Titan sensed Jack's fatigue. It cornered him against a large boulder. Jack had nowhere to run. The Titan lunged. Jack tried to roll away but wasn't fast enough. A massive claw caught his leg, tearing through his makeshift armor. Pain shot through Jack's body. He fell to the ground, blood flowing from the wound. The Titan moved in for the kill. Jack saw his death in those alien eyes. But as the creature opened its mouth to deliver the final bite, Jack noticed something. The gap in the Titan's armor near its throat was visible. It was small, but it might be enough. With his remaining strength, Jack grabbed his knife. As the Titan lunged forward, Jack thrust the knife into the gap with all his might. The blade sank deep into soft flesh. The Titan reared back in pain. It thrashed and roared, trying to dislodge the knife. Jack rolled away, leaving the knife embedded in the creature. The Titan's movements became erratic. It clawed at its own throat, trying to remove the weapon. Jack grabbed a pouch from his belt. It contained paste made from local plants with paralyzing properties. He had discovered their effect while testing which plants were safe to eat. Jack had nearly died that day, his muscles frozen for hours. He threw the pouch at the Titan's face. The pouch burst open, covering the Titan's eyes and mouth with the paste. The effect wasn't immediate, but within minutes, the Titan's movements began to slow. Its massive body swayed. It fought against the paralyzing effect, but the poison worked its way through its system. The Titan collapsed to the ground. It wasn't dead, but it couldn't move. Its eyes tracked Jack as he limped forward, clutching his wounded leg. Jack picked up his spear. The rules of challenge were clear. The loser died. That was the law of this world. Jack raised the spear to deliver the final blow. But then he stopped. He looked around at the watching creatures. They waited to see what he would do. Jack realized he had a choice. He could follow the old rules or make new ones. Jack lowered his spear. Instead, he placed his hand on the Titan's head and made a sound of dominance the prowlers used. It meant victory without death, mercy from a position of strength. The watching creatures made sounds of confusion. This wasn't how challenges ended, but they didn't interfere. They watched, waiting. Jack stood tall despite his pain. Blood soaked his leg, but he remained standing over the paralyzed Titan. He had won, but not by the old rules. He had won by human rules. As the sun reached its peak, the message spread through the forest. The human had defeated a Titan, and then done something new. Something that changed everything. 6 months had passed since Jack defeated the Titan. His leg had healed, though he walked with a slight limp. The scar was a permanent reminder of his battle. Jack's world had changed completely. The territory that once belonged to the Titan was now his. Jack had built a more permanent home in a large cave system near a river. He had marked the boundaries of his territory using scent markers and symbols carved into trees that the local creatures seemed to understand. Even more surprising was how the creatures treated him. The prowlers now lived close to his cave, acting as guards and hunting companions. They brought their young ones to him, as if wanting Jack to teach them. Other animals brought him gifts, rare fruits, interesting stones, and even medicinal plants when he was sick. They see me as more than just another predator, Jack recorded in his log. They see me as some kind of leader. Jack had developed a system for managing his territory. He divided the hunting grounds among different predator groups. The prowlers hunted in the eastern forests. A group of smaller ravagers was allowed to hunt in the southern plains, as long as they didn't take more than they needed. Even a few slashers were permitted to stay, hunting in the western hills under Jack's watchful eye. Today, Jack sat on a high rock overlooking his domain. Spot, now fully grown, lay beside him. The young prowler had become Jack's closest companion. Together, they watched the activity below. Prey animals grazed in open areas while predators respected the boundaries Jack had established. Not bad for a stranded human, Jack said, patting Spot's head. A warning call came from the northern boundary. Jack recognized the sound. Prowlers signaling an intruder. He grabbed his spear and moved quickly through the forest. Spot at his side. Other prowlers joined them as they ran. At the boundary, Jack found his sentries facing another titan. This one was even larger than the one Jack had defeated. Its armor was darker, with red patterns that seemed to glow in the sunlight. The new titan was making challenge sounds, claiming Jack's territory. Jack stepped forward. The prowlers moved aside, forming a half-circle behind him. The new titan focused its many eyes on Jack, seeming surprised to see a human. Back for round 2, Jack muttered. But this would not be like the first fight. Jack was smarter now. He understood the planet better, and he wasn't alone. Jack made a series of signals, some with sounds, others with body language. The watching creatures responded immediately. Prowlers moved to the left and right, circling behind a titan. Small flying creatures Jack had befriended rose from the trees, diving at the titan's eyes to distract it. The titan roared in confusion. This wasn't a normal challenge. It was used to one-on-one combat, not coordinated attacks. Jack stepped forward and made the formal challenge sound. The titan responded, accepting. But as they prepared to fight, Jack gave another signal. 3 prowlers rushed forward, biting at the titan's legs before jumping away. The titan turned to chase them, exposing its side to Jack. Jack threw his spear with perfect aim, hitting the same weak spot in the armor that all titans shared. The spear didn't go deep enough to kill, but it hurt the titan. It spun around, facing Jack again. Jack stood his ground, making a sound that meant surrender or die in the language of predators. The titan didn't surrender. It charged. Jack gave another signal. From the trees above, nets made of vines fell on the titan. Jack had spent weeks teaching the climbing creatures how to drop these traps. The titan struggled against the vines, getting more tangled. Jack approached with another spear. The titan thrashed but couldn't break free. Jack pointed the spear at the gap in its armor. "You can leave and never return, or you can die here," Jack said, knowing the titan wouldn't understand his words but would understand his intent. The titan stopped struggling. It made a low sound of submission. Jack cut away the vines around its head and legs. The titan backed away slowly, still watching Jack. Then it turned and left Jack's territory, moving much faster than something so large should be able to move. The gathered creatures made excited sounds. A second titan had challenged Jack, and again Jack had won. But this time, he had won by working with the other creatures, not just by his own strength. That night, a celebration occurred in Jack's territory. Different species gathered near his cave. They brought food and made sounds of contentment. Jack sat among them, no longer feeling like a stranded human on an alien world. This was his home now. These were his people. and he was their king. 2 years had passed since Jack crashed on the alien world. The planet's strong gravity and high oxygen had changed his body. His muscles were thick and powerful. His senses had sharpened. Scars covered his skin, telling the story of countless battles and hunts. Jack's territory had grown. What started as the land of one titan now covered an area larger than any single predator had ever controlled. Different species lived together under rules Jack had created. Predators hunted only what they needed. Prey animals received protection in exchange for allowing some of their numbers to be taken. Jack sat by the river, sharpening a new spear. Spot and 3 other prowlers rested nearby. The morning was peaceful. Birds with 6 wings flew overhead. Small lizard-like creatures skittered across rocks. A strange sound broke the quiet. Jack looked up. It was faint but familiar, a sound that didn't belong on this world. The roar of engines. "No way," Jack whispered, standing up. He climbed to the top of a tall rock and looked at the sky. A ship burned through the atmosphere, leaving a trail of fire. It was heading for the plains where Jack had first crashed. "They came back," Jack said, his voice cracking with emotion. He ran toward the landing site, Spot following close behind. Other creatures joined them, curious about Jack's excitement. By the time the ship touched down, Jack was watching from the edge of the forest, with dozens of animals around him. The ship was larger than the one that had left him behind. Its hull bore the same markings as the U.S. horizon. A ramp extended from its side. Armed figures in protective suits walked out. Jack recognized the leader, Captain Sam Lewis. Behind him was Dr. Olivia Grant. They looked the same as when Jack last saw them, though their faces showed signs of stress. "Spread out," Captain Lewis ordered. "Find any remains of Lieutenant Mason's escape pod. We need to recover his body if possible." "Be careful," Dr. Grant added. "This planet's predators are extremely dangerous." Jack watched them scan the area with weapons ready. They were afraid. They remembered what happened last time. Jack felt a mix of emotions: anger at being abandoned, joy at seeing humans again, uncertainty about what to do. A young crew member moved too close to a patch of purple ferns. A small ravager hiding there hissed in warning. The crew member panicked and raised his weapon. "No," Jack shouted, stepping from the forest. The expedition team spun around, weapons pointed at Jack. Then they froze in shock. Jack knew what they saw. A man with long hair and a beard, dressed in animal skins and armor made from predator plates. A man surrounded by creatures that should be trying to eat him, not standing calmly at his side. "Lieutenant Mason?" Captain Lewis asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Hello, Captain," Jack replied. His human speech felt strange after so long using the sounds of this world. "Took you long enough." Dr. Grant stepped forward but stopped when Spot growled. Jack made a soft sound, and Spot went quiet. "Impossible," Dr. Grant said. "You're alive. And you're controlling these creatures." Jack smiled. "Not controlling. Leading. There's a difference." The crew stared in amazement as Jack walked toward them. Prowlers, ravagers, and even a young slasher followed him like loyal pets. Birds circled overhead. Small creatures peeked from the purple vegetation. "Lower your weapons," Jack said. "You're in my territory now. No hunting without permission." "Your territory?" Captain Lewis asked, slowly lowering his weapon. The others did the same. 2 years is a long time, Captain, Jack said. "Things change. I changed." Dr. Grant studied the creatures around Jack with scientific wonder. "This is unprecedented. They're different species, predators and prey. They should be attacking each other, not cooperating." "They learned something new," Jack explained, "just like I did." Captain Lewis looked uncomfortable. "We came back for your remains. We thought, after the attack." "You left me for dead," Jack finished for him. There was no anger in his voice, just statement of fact. "We had no choice," Captain Lewis said. "The ship was damaged. We needed repairs before we could return. Jack nodded. He understood the logic, even if it had cost him 2 years of his life, or given him 2 years of a new life, depending on how he looked at it. "Why don't you come inside the ship?" Dr. Grant suggested. "We have food, clean clothes. We can treat your injuries." Jack looked at his animals, then back at the humans. 2 worlds, 2 lives. The ship meant returning to Earth, to civilization. But this planet was his home now. These creatures were his family. "I'd like to see your ship," Jack said finally. "But there's something you need to understand first." He turned to the forest and made a series of sounds. More creatures emerged from hiding. Hundreds of them. Different species. Inside the U.S. horizon, Jack sat in the ship's meeting room. The metal chair felt strange after years of sitting on stone and wood. Clean clothes covered his scared body. His beard had been trimmed, but his eyes remained the same, alert and wild like those of the predators he led. Captain Lewis, Dr. Grant, and 5 other crew members sat across from him. They had spent hours asking questions. Jack had told them everything. How he survived, how he learned to communicate with the creatures, how he became their leader. "This is the most important xenobiological discovery in human history," Dr. Grant said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Different species working together in a cooperative society led by a human. It changes everything we know about alien life." Captain Lewis nodded. "The science team will want to study this for years. And the military will be interested too," added Commander Harris, the ship's security officer. "The tactical applications are enormous." Jack listened quietly. He understood their excitement. To them, he was a miracle, a man who had done the impossible. But they didn't truly understand what he had become or what he had built. "The ship leaves tomorrow," Captain Lewis said. "We have room for you and any specimens you want to bring back." "Specimens?" Jack asked, his voice hard. Dr. Grant looked uncomfortable. "For study. Under controlled conditions, of course. Humane treatment is guaranteed." Jack stood up slowly. The room went quiet. Even in clean clothes, there was something dangerous about him. Something that reminded them he was no longer just Lieutenant Jack Mason. He was something more. "I'm not going back," Jack said simply. Captain Lewis frowned. "Lieutenant, I understand you've been through a traumatic experience, but Earth is your home." "Not anymore," Jack replied. "This planet is my home now. These creatures are my family, my responsibility." "You can't stay here alone," Commander Harris argued. Jack smiled. "I'm not alone. I haven't been alone since the day I learned to speak their language." He walked to the window and looked out at the gathering of creatures waiting patiently outside the ship. Hundreds of them. From tiny flying insects to massive predators, all coexisting because of the rules Jack had created. "I've built something here," Jack explained. "Something that has never existed before on this planet. If I leave, it all falls apart. They go back to killing each other without limits. The balance is destroyed." Dr. Grant joined him at the window. "Then let us stay. Let us learn from you. We can establish a research base." Jack considered this. A small base might be acceptable. But there are conditions. No hunting without permission. No experiments on the local life without my approval. This is their world, not ours. Captain Lewis started to object, but Jack cut him off. "Those are my terms. This is my territory. Your visitors here." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Captain Lewis nodded slowly. "I'll need to clear this with command, but I think they'll agree. You've accomplished something remarkable here, Lieutenant." "Just Jack now," he corrected. "Lieutenant Mason died when you left him behind. What returned is something different." The next day, Jack stood on a hilltop watching as crew members unloaded supplies from the ship. A small base was being established near the landing site. Dr. Grant had already begun cataloging species under Jack's supervision. Spot sat beside Jack, watching the humans with curious eyes. Jack rubbed the prowler's head. "It's going to be a strange new world," Jack told his friend. Humans and aliens learning to live together. A young prowler approached, carrying something in its mouth. It dropped a small metal object at Jack's feet. His old military ID tag, which he had lost months ago. Jack picked it up and smiled. The young prowler made a happy sound. In the distance, Dr. Grant was trying to approach a group of ravagers. They kept their distance, unsure of this new human. Jack made a series of sounds, signals that meant friend and safe. The ravagers relaxed slightly, allowing Dr. Grant to move closer. Small steps, Jack said to himself. From the highest branch of a nearby tree, a small flying creature that Jack had befriended years ago made a melodic call. Other creatures answered from across the forest. The sound spread like a wave through Jack's territory, a chorus of different voices somehow forming a harmonious whole. Captain Lewis climbed the hill to join Jack. Command has approved the research base. They're sending more scientists in 6 months. Jack nodded but didn't take his eyes off his kingdom. By then, your people will have learned the first rule of this world. What's that? Captain Lewis asked. Jack turned to him, his eyes reflecting the alien sunlight. That sometimes the most human thing we can do is learn to be something more than human.